Hello, I'm Jenny Klochko and you're watching my podcast. It is a platform where you can find interesting stories and phenomenal guests. Here we discuss the matters beyond the daily newsfeed, and I hope our conversations make you think and help you to get to the bottom of the very complicated matters. Today I'm meeting Ben Hodges, Lieutenant General, as Commanding General in the United States Army Europe. General Hodges is in Frankfurt. I'm in London, but thank God we have Zoom. Good morning, Ben. How are you today?
Jenny, good morning. Doing great, and I'm happy to be on this with you.
Oh, it's very kind of you. So let's start with your thoughts on the current situation in war with war in Ukraine. And Ukraine finally started receiving military aid from the US, which was delayed. Russia intensified the massive attacks on Ukrainian cities and frontline staff, and possibly trying to destroy the alleged location of F-16 infrastructure. Something related to it, the head of defense intelligence, Budanov, recently said that at the end of May and June, it will be tough on the front line. What are your thoughts on the situation and on the war dynamics itself?
I think, first of all, of course, General Budanov is correct. It is very difficult on the front lines there, both in the far eastern part of Ukraine, as well as around Kharkiv. Not only for soldiers, but for civilians who are being targeted directly by Kremlin forces. So, yes, absolutely, it's a tough situation. But I think it's worth putting this in context. I see 2024, this year, as a year of stabilization, where Ukraine has demonstrated that even without U.S. aid for almost 6 months, Russians were not able to exploit it. In fact, the Russians have continued to suffer thousands of casualties and lost vehicles every week. And this tells me that they don't have the ability, the Russians do not have the ability to knock Ukraine out of the war. They have not been able to exploit even the opportunity of 6 months of no additional U.S. aid. They couldn't go beyond Avdiivka or Bakhmut, for example, and they could not overwhelm defenders around Kharkiv. So that tells me that Russia's only hope is that we in the West quit, that we turn our back on Ukraine, which I don't think is going to happen. And so they're trying to just kill as many innocent people and destroy the power grid to break the will of Ukrainian people. That's the only thing they can do. So that's the biggest thing I think that's happening. In the meanwhile, Ukraine is continuing to pound away at Crimea. The destruction of multiple air defense systems on Crimea and other places. This is not a coincidence. This is number one. It's a result of good targeting by Ukrainian general staff to eliminate air defenses, which is exactly what we would do. You destroy the enemy's air defense so that then you can come in with other platforms to hit the key targets. But it also reflects the importance of finally the administration allowing Ukraine to use long-range U.S. weapons, ATACMS, 300-kilometer range ATACMS, to hit targets that the Ukrainians know are out there. So I see a lot of positive things happening, actually.
These long-range missiles, do you think it's a game changer?
Yeah, I stay away from the phrase game changer because there's never one thing that changes the war. It's the combination of proper employment, and nobody is better than the Ukrainians at adapting to new technologies and figuring out how to get the best out of any technology that's there. But it's also even technology without the political will is going to be insufficient. So what would really be the game changer is if the President of the United States and the German Bundeskanzler both came out and publicly said, it is our strategic interest and our objective that Ukraine defeats Russia. Say it that plain, no nuance, no indirect diplo speak. Say it. We want Ukraine to win. We need Ukraine to win, and we're going to do everything, give them everything they need. That would be a game changer.
Theoretically, but it's actually, as You see, there's one perception from the civilian point and journalistic point, but there's the other point from the military person, from the officer. Do you see that it's actually resonate the strategic interest of the UK, US, Ukraine wins? Because there are speculations, that it is better to have controlled war in Ukraine rather than uncontrolled civic war in Russia if Ukraine wins on the battlefield. And it's difficult to predict Putin's behavior, difficult to predict what's happening within Russia. It's a vast country, and it's a country who has nuclear bomb.
Well, you know what? What happened at the end of the Soviet Union when the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union broke up? What happened? Millions of people became free. That's what happened. Nobody lost control of nuclear weapons. But we failed to anticipate that this was going to happen, and so we were not prepared. And so we missed the opportunity to help Russia make this transition towards a more liberal democratic society, even though, of course, they had no institutions, no memory of any or knowledge of anything like that. But instead, the oligarchs got incredibly wealthy. They stole everything and got control. And so that's how you end up with a guy like Putin in charge. But nobody lost control of nuclear weapons. And so I think we should not be stopping Ukraine from defeating Russia just because we're worried about what might happen inside Russia. In fact, we should be doing what we can to accelerate the collapse of the regime, the fall of Putin. Why should he be kept in a job? I think the Russian people have suffered long enough for the last several hundred years under all different types of rulers. But at the end of the day, that's not my concern. My concern is the international rules-based order, people of Ukraine that want to be integrated to the West, and of course, the nations that live closest to Russia, the ones who would feel the effect of this sort of chaotic outcome that you've described more than anybody. They all want to see Ukraine win. And they, in fact, most of them are giving up their own weapons so that Ukraine can win. And this would also be a very important signal to China. The Chinese need to see that the collective West has the political will, the industrial capacity, the military capability to help Ukraine defeat Russia. That would tell the Chinese that we'd be willing to help stop them as well. So an important message of deterrence of Communist China.
Do you see the political will? Because we have this political statements and political declaration. There's one thing. There's the other actual actions. And do you see the attributes of this action? Do you see the attributes of this political will from the US side? Because it's the strongest member in this circle of friends of Ukraine.
Yeah, not yet. And that's the reason why I said it would be a game changer if the American president and the German Bundeskanzler both came out and said, we want Ukraine to win, not some kind of backwards language of we hope Russia loses or we don't want Ukraine to lose. Say in a positive, declarative way, we want Ukraine to win. That would be political will, and it would be the clarity that's needed. Now, I think certainly every country from Finland all the way down to Romania, they're not confused about this. They want Ukraine to win. They know what's at stake here. Sweden as well, other European countries, but particularly in the U.S. and in Germany, it hasn't come through that strongly. If these two leaders would say this and explain why it's in our interests for people in the middle of the United States or for people in the western part of Germany, why it's in their interest, then I think actually most people would say, okay, let's do it.
You're saying that we shouldn't, we as a world community, as the people who protect and Western values, and we shouldn't be afraid of collapse of Putin's regime. Do you think as an officer, as general, as a person with experience, do you think the crash of Putin's regime is organic and unavoidable process at the meantime, or it's more wishful thinking? We are not there yet.
Well, of course, we're not there yet, but I have yet to meet a single person who said that in 1988 they predicted the fall of the Soviet Union. So I mean, I think when it does happen, when the Putin regime collapses, it will be probably sudden. And of course, I don't think that there's big protests waiting to take to the streets in Moscow or St. Petersburg. I think Putin's interior security forces, I mean, they have smashed any networks of people that, are against the war or that are against the regime. They're all either dead or in jail or hiding. So I don't imagine we'll see protests in the streets. But at some point, the oligarchs around him will have to take matters into their own hands because I see that they have lost billions of dollars of income. They can't go anywhere. They can't send their kids to school in London anymore or Switzerland or when they start feeling it, then I think the pressure on Putin will be severe. Now, look, I mean, how humiliating must it have been for Putin to go to Pyongyang and go with his hat in his hand to Kim Jong-un, basically so he can get artillery ammunition. This is the great Russia. I think that not only is it humiliating, and I think Russians who pay attention will be humiliated by this, but also this may have pushed South Korea to the point that, okay, we're going to support Ukraine now because Putin has made this deal of some sort, some kind of security agreement with Kim Jong-un in North Korea to help them if there's ever a conflict, and also, more worryingly, provide missile technology that could potentially help North Korea get a nuclear weapon. So South Korea is not just going to sit around and watch that unfold either. So I think there's going to be these are all indicators of the decline of the Putin regime. And the fact that they are going around locking up anybody they can find to force them into the army, because nobody, when I hear how, Crimea is holy land for Russia and there's no way they can lose it, why do they have to go and raid discos to grab young men that don't have proper papers and put them into the army?
Well, about South Korea, they've been already helpful, and the friendship seems like very hopeful, and it's the country is already supportive towards Ukraine. I don't know what they can do more. I mean, Ukraine definitely needs more, but hopefully it will encourage. Do you think it's the Putin's regime collapse? It's equal to the collapse of Russia as a federation of different little states. Do you think it's connected between themselves, or it's two different matters?
I think that you could end up with both or just one. It depends on how the regime collapse actually takes place. I would imagine that of the 70 or 80 different oblasts and entities that make up the Russian Federation, quite a few of them would be happy to be free of Russian imperialistic and colonial control. The Chechens have fought 2 wars against Russia already, and I don't know how strong the hold is that Kadyrov has over his fellow Chechens. I hadn't heard his name in a long time, by the way. So we'll see. I don't know. And look, I want to be very clear. The United States, we have a unsuccessful record of trying to bring about regime change. So I'm not advocating that we cause it. What I am advocating is that we should not be scared of it happening if it happens from inside Russia. And we should also, I am advocating that we should prepare for it. Make sure we know where all those nuclear weapons are. Who's going to take over the oil and gas infrastructure? I mean, China and India both depend on very cheap Russian oil right now. So they will not have an interest in chaos either. They don't want that being interrupted. So I think we should prepare for that and understand, plus where all the money is. I mean, there will be people, when they see it's about to happen, they will be trying to get money out of Russia and hide it somewhere in Switzerland or offshore somewhere. These are the kind of things we should be thinking about with an eye towards a stable, secure Europe and rebuilding Ukraine.
The European political leaders like Macron and Scholz are making powerful statements comparing to what was happening at the beginning of war, how many calls President Macron had with Putin. And they both, at the moment, seem very supportive of Ukraine. But from the military leader perspective, what needs to be done to win and finish the Russian war in Ukraine? Have we lost the precious time while waiting for military aid from US?
Well, certainly we've lost a lot of time. Ukraine has lost a lot of time. The West has missed a huge opportunity. Russia should have been defeated last year. But because of indecisiveness on our part, I mean, think about this. What's been happening for over 2 years is that the Biden administration, which I think deserves a lot of credit for what it has done, still decisions have been very incremental. Even in the last, I think, 3 weeks, there's been multiple decisions about whether or not Ukraine could use U.S. weapons across the border against targets. And so yesterday I was reading where the National Security Advisor, Mr. Sullivan, said, well, it's just common sense. Of course, Ukraine should be able to hit target. Where was that 3 weeks ago where they were saying, no, we don't want to. So there's been this, I think, very unhelpful, excessive and unnecessary excessive fear that Russia might somehow use a nuclear weapon if an American-made weapon was used by Ukraine against Russia across the border. And so we have been incremental in all of our decision-making instead of being decisive. And of course, not every country has been that way. The French have stepped out, and President Macron has been very forward-leaning, although let's see what he actually does. The language certainly is powerful, but the French contributions, not so much. So let's see that. Germany, on the other hand, has been not very compelling, the Bundeskanzler in language, but they have provided a lot of very good quality stuff. So I think what I'm trying to advocate is this, going back to the beginning, where what would be a game changer, it's political strategic objective. All these things are examples of policy decisions, but if policy is not tied to a strategic outcome, then almost never will you get good policy. You know, we spent 20 years in Afghanistan and only had a clear objective the first year. Then we spent the next 20 years, 19 years, coming up with policies that were not tied to a strategic outcome. So I think getting that part right, if I were still in the Army and if I was in a position to do something about it, you know, whenever I was told, hey, go give them this or go do this, I would always insist on asking for what objective? What are we trying to accomplish, Mr. President? Going to the Herr Bundeskanzler, what's our strategic objective? And then I can give you the military contribution to achieving that objective. I think that this year is about stabilizing the front so that there are no major breakthroughs anywhere. It's about Ukraine enlarging the size of its forces. You know, Ukraine has been fighting now with people that are exhausted, and they have failed. The Ukrainian government has failed to establish a proper training and education and recruiting base that most professional armies have. So you've got to have you got to improve the recruiting process, because everybody that was going to volunteer out of patriotism, that's done. Now you've got to attract women and men to want to serve. And the way you do that is by assuring them and their families that they won't be sent into the fight until they are properly trained, properly equipped, and put in a unit that's trained and ready to go. So that's an important part of the recruiting, and then the education to help these women and men be ready to fight. This is what Ukraine has got to do this year, as well as rebuilding its own defense industry. These are the things that will be necessary so that I think next year we have a chance for a decisive outcome.
It looks like express course on everything, because all Ukraine had is leftovers of Soviet army, and nobody really was seriously trying to prepare for the big war, or there was a big disbelief. So hopefully, do you see indications that there are steps that is going to be a more civilized and more reliable process of recruitment and putting the foundation of the strong army, to continue fight Russia?
Well, that's what's needed. The fact that there were big political debates in the Rada about the age for conscription and these kind of things, I'm not convinced yet that the government has taken all the necessary steps to formally do this. And this has to be done by the government. This is not the job of General Syrski. This is the government has to lay out.
What are the steps which would be needed in this situation?
Well, as I said, recruiting. You have to attract women and men who are in Ukraine. The Ukraine, while Russia is a larger country, Ukraine does not have a manpower problem. There are millions of women and men that are military age in Ukraine, as well as here in Germany and in Poland and Romania. Okay, so they've got to be attracted to want to serve, and that means being confident that they won't be sent to the meat grinder, but like a Russian recruit, but instead they will be properly trained and equipped and put in the unit so that they have the best chance to accomplish their mission and survive, and that families will be taken care of if something happens to their soldier. So that's what I mean by fixing the recruiting system so that they can enlarge the military. And then there's got to be an education part of this, leader training. There are still, unfortunately, too many vestiges of old Soviet culture in the military. I know that the former chief of the general staff, or the former chief of the military, General Zaluzhny, who is now ambassador there in UK, he tried very hard to get rid of the old Soviet mentality, but there's still too much of it. And I think this hurts recruiting, because I think some families have in their mind that there is still this sort of prison culture inside the military, and they don't want their son or daughter to go into that. So that's why this is not just a task for the military. This is a task for the government to change that. There are too many healthy, fit Ukrainian women and men walking around in Germany and Poland and Romania, and also in Ukraine, that should be helping to defend their country.
Going back to the European leaders, one of the strongest statements from Macron was sending troops, French troops, to Ukraine. I know you're not very keen or very careful with this idea. My question is, do you think, again, the situation how it looks now, because war brings own attributes and moments, is Ukraine able to win this war without foreign troops on the ground?
Yes. Yes. In fact, President Zelensky said, we don't need troops, we just need the tools. I'm not against sending our own troops in there to do tasks that would be helpful, like air defense or engineering or logistics or planning, intelligence, etc. But again, before I sent one French, American, German, British soldier or Polish soldier into Ukraine, I would want to know, for what? I mean, what's the mission? What is the objective we're trying to achieve? Because it's too easy for our civilian leaders to just throw soldiers at a problem, or airplanes or drones, without correctly identifying what it is we're trying to accomplish. What's the end state? And so if the end state is declared, then we will come up with the right mix of types of capabilities that would be needed and integrated into what Ukraine is trying to do. I loved it, though, that President Macron said that, partly because now, finally, it looks like we in the West are thinking strategically about getting the initiative, give the Russians something to worry about. I mean, usually we're always responding to whatever they say or do, instead of them having to worry, what is the point where Macron would actually send French to do whatever, whether it's trainers or air defense or whatever. And of course, every nation, every sovereign nation can do this in a bilateral way. This is not a NATO thing. I think that even if President Macron doesn't intend to send one French baguette into Ukraine, the fact that he says he's willing to consider it is terrific. And I thought it was a mistake when President Biden 2.5 years ago said, no U.S. boots on the ground. Why would you say that? I mean, why would you tell the enemy what you're not going to do?
Maybe it was part of the political rhetorics. Your opinion on Putin's peace talks. Do you think it is the time to sit at the table?
No, absolutely not. There's a reason he wasn't invited to the thing in Switzerland, because he has zero intention of actually participating in any peace talk. He's already laid out what his conditions are. Basically, everything that Russia has taken, plus a little bit more, that's the start point, that they keep all that. Why? No serious Ukrainian leader would ever agree to something like that. And we would all be foolish to agree to something like that, to reward Putin's aggression, his thousands of war crimes, and the potential for what comes next. This is why European leaders are finally waking up and getting serious. Even guys like Macron and Schultz that realize, especially if the U.S. turns its back under a Trump administration, and I don't know that it will, but the fact that people even worry about that's bad. It's embarrassing from my perspective. But European leaders are realizing that if Ukraine fails, then they're going to be dealing directly with Russia themselves within the next 2, 3, 4 years. And all the fallout from a Ukrainian failure, millions more Ukrainian refugees, continued disruption of grain and energy out of Ukraine. All of these bad consequences will happen if Ukraine fails. So they realize it's much better to help Ukraine defeat Russia in Ukraine than to take the appeasement route and stop doing things that might provoke, in their mind, Russia, because you're going to be dealing with Russia anyway.
American elections. We understand that now both candidates address more to the electorate than to the international community. So how will the presidential elections affect Ukraine's military support and possible global political scene?
I think it's hard to predict exactly what a President Trump would do if he's elected, and obviously I hope he's not elected. But we have to think about, and European countries have to be prepared for that possibility. As horrifying as it is and embarrassing as it is, I'm not 100% convinced that Trump would just turn his back on Ukraine. I think he will have some advisors that think China is the only thing that matters and that Europe is Europe's problem. But it's one thing when you're on the campaign trail. It's a different thing when you're actually in office and have the responsibility and you have to deal with the consequences of bad decisions. And American prosperity, our economic prosperity, is tied directly to Europe's economic prosperity. And the European prosperity is affected, obviously, by a massive war in Europe. Refugees, energy, food prices, et cetera. So I think even if for only selfish economic reasons, it's in our interest to make sure that Ukraine is able to defeat Russia. And I think even Trump or some of his team should be able to see that. Most Americans, in fact, most members of Congress support giving aid to Ukraine.
Interesting about Trump, with the Ukrainian servicemen when I was speaking, and they said that the first ammunition from America was delivered to Ukraine during Trump presidency. And while President Obama was at power and Crimea was annexed, and he didn't do anything until the last month of his presidency, he started sending by bulks Russian diplomats out of the country. So it seems like Trump can be the person or helping and pressing the button and explode the Kremlin, or coming up with something new and shock the world. When about F-16, when I was talking to the Ukrainian pilots who were in the US and training for the future fighter jets, they told me, because we discussed, I asked them the What's the impression, or they were inspired by being in America? Especially, I noticed a big change for the very young pilots. They come from Ukraine there and getting very inspired with this Western approach for the pilots, and comparing to the leftovers of the Soviet one, which is very frustrating for them. But this one, he said very interesting thing. Ukraine needs to change the whole military doctrine, because it is built around the principle of defense. And it's more at the moment, the infantry suffers the most because they go forwards, they mostly dying. But what it does mean would help to, if Ukraine changed the approach into American, where the aviation starts burning the ground and only then infantry can advance. Would you agree on that, or it doesn't make any sense?
Well, yes, we would never launch a ground attack without having already achieved air superiority. We would not expose our troops without having already done that. But that's not just about having airplanes. It's an entire mindset. It's a culture. It's a lot of training that goes into that. To be able to destroy the enemy's air defense, then you go after the enemy's headquarters, and then you go after their ability to put their own planes in the air. So that's getting air superiority is part of that. But yes, of course, that was what was missing last year, and that's what was frustrating, is that because the U.S. and others had failed to deliver, help Ukraine build its air power starting over 2 years ago. So now here we are, still don't have any F-16s in the air, almost 2.5 years after the large-scale invasion. So it's coming eventually, and I have confidence that Ukrainian pilots will be very effective once they get in there and they're getting experience. But as I said earlier, and then you just said it again, this is about a culture, a mindset of getting rid of the old Soviet style of doing things. And, if you want young people to use initiative, unleash their potential, be willing to do certain things that were never allowed in the Soviet model. And so we've got to eradicate that from inside the government and the military.
About sanctions, numerous packages of these sanctions were introduced, but privately I was told by those who work within this industry, they say, first of all, British government doesn't have a manpower to conduct all the control if the company is cooperating with whom and how, because it's quite complicated matter. On the other hand, they say only a few. Basically, a few super rich Russians were affected badly. The rest, they don't even take it seriously. They live around the world, they have fantastic properties, and they couldn't care less. What do you think? What we can change in it, or hasn't been done?
Well, I think this is a long-term process. We've all learned a lot about sanctions and what's required to do it. It's tedious. It does take time. And of course, Russians are able to, real criminals are able to hide their money in family members or whatever. So this does take time. But there are some things you can do that have immediate impact, such as stopping the shadow fleets that are exporting oil through the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea that go to China. That gives China or Russia income. This oil is going to China and also to India. These are unsafe, unseaworthy vessels that are huge environmental risks. And I think the nations of the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea could, in fact, take more steps to stop them from going out. So that would be one thing that would have immediate impact. I cannot believe that we have not figured out a way to stop ammunition going from North Korea to Russia. I mean, there's got to be some things that can be done to prevent that from happening. Same from Iran. Now, I think part of sanctions is also naming and shaming. That until the actual laws are done or enforced, something like unbelievably the German candy company that makes Ritter Sport, they're still operating in Russia. Okay.
Because Russian kids like chocolate. That's why they
I know
stay there.
they deserve it, and Ukrainian kids like to live. So I mean, this is where there should be just constant public pressure on companies that, and there are U.S. companies also, by the way, that are selling things that go through India and then they end up in Russia, components for weapons, for example. So I think this is going to be a continuous process. Or a long process to eventually achieve the effect that we have to achieve. It's not going to happen quickly.
When do you think we will see victorious end of war in Ukraine, and how likely it to be victorious for us, or it is?
Well, Ukraine wins this war when Vladimir Putin realizes he has lost. That's I mean, it's that simple. It won't be casualties. He doesn't care how many of his own people are killed or what the costs are. It's only when he realizes that he is going to be thrown out of power if he continues doing what he does. And so that means we have to help Ukraine liberate Crimea. We have to help Ukraine destroy or severely damage Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, which generates their money either by going after the infrastructure or stopping these ships that are exporting it, and by continued tightening of the noose, if you will, around the Kremlin, the Putin regime. The fact that the peace conference in Switzerland had almost 100 countries there. Meanwhile, the CSTO was down to, I think, 5 members, and Putin is in Pyongyang. That tells you that all the indicators are going in the right direction. Now is the time to keep the pressure up. None of this nonsense that Ukraine needs to negotiate.
Thank you very much, General Hodges. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Have a fantastic Saturday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for watching. Please share your thoughts. Do you think it's time to start the peace talks with Putin? Or maybe you've got other ideas after you've listened to what General Hodges said? Let me know in the comments below. And I would like to say each or every one of you huge thank you. It's been 3 months since I launched this podcast, and now we've got 1,000 subscribers. I'm overwhelmed. I didn't expect that. And thank you very, very much for all your subscriptions. And those who haven't, please do. I will do my best to deliver you interesting stories, fantastic guests, and hope it will be very interesting for you. Please let me know what you think in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, and I'm Jenny Klochko. Thank you for watching.